Hello again, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Tuesday, the 24th of October. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is Scotland at 7. Our apologies for starting slightly late this evening. As ever, the technology is causing some challenges for us. However, as always, we are persisting. This evening, I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 243 of the illegal Russian war of aggression and imperial ambition. Then I will introduce our guest for this evening, and then together we will look at today's headlines from Scotland and around the world. Russia has urged more civilians in occupied Kherson to flee ahead of the anticipated Ukrainian counteroffensive. Russian authorities told residents to take documents, money, valuables and clothes due to the tense situation on the front. About 25,000 people have been evacuated since Tuesday, the Interfax news agency said. Russia's grip on Kherson appears increasingly fragile. The US think tank, the Institute for the Study of War, said the urgent call to flee indicated that the occupiers do not expect a rapid Russian return or civilian return to the city and appear to be trying to depopulate it to damage its long-term social and economic viability. Russia has been accused of planning to blow up the Nova Kakhovka Dam. Breaching it could flood a swathe of southern Ukraine, including Kherson. Ukraine and the US denounced suggestions from Russia that Ukraine was preparing to use a dirty bomb as dangerous lies. If Russia calls and says that Ukraine is allegedly preparing something, it means one thing: Russia has already prepared all this, according to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, who was speaking in a video address. Iran has said it will supply Russia with 40 turbines to help the Russian gas industry beat Western sanctions over Moscow's war in Ukraine. Ukraine's Special Operations Forces said that Iranian drone instructors have been spotted in Belarus. Russia fired missiles and drones into Ukrainian-held Mykolaiv on Sunday, destroying an apartment block. Mykolaiv lies roughly 35 kilometres northwest of the front line to occupied Kherson. Speaking on the opening of a three-day peace conference in Rome on Sunday, the French President Emmanuel Macron said it's up to Ukraine to decide the time and the terms of peace with Russia, and he cautioned that the end of the war can't be the consecration of the law of the strongest. Russian airstrikes on energy infrastructure across the Ukraine have left more than 1 million households without electricity. And a German lobby group representing companies with interests in Eastern Europe has called for a plan to rebuild Ukraine that would mirror the Marshall Plan that helped Europe recover from the Second World War. Now, we are lucky enough to be joined this evening by Ronnie Cowan MP. Ronnie has been the SNP MP for Inverclyde since 2015. He is lucky enough to have grown up and lived in Greenock and is now the MP for the town and the surrounding area. Ronnie is the Vice Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Groups on Gambling-Related Harm, Drug Policy Reform, Medical Cannabis Under Prescription, and is also the Treasurer of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Commercial Sexual Exploitation. He's also Vice Chair of the Cross-Party Parliamentary and Local Government Working Group on Universal Basic Income. Ronnie, good evening. Thank you for joining us in Scotland at 7. How are you keeping?
I'm doing very well indeed, thanks very much. I'm hoping our connection hangs up. I'm doing well, the connection's a little bit dodgy, it's a little bit slower, so hopefully it'll hang for the duration of the programme though.
Thanks, Ronnie. It's often a challenge. We will persist, and I hope that, as you say, we can continue the conversation and that the gremlins don't get in the way. Our first story this evening, of course, is that Rishi Sunak has become the new Conservative leader and will be Prime Minister after Penny Mordaunt followed Boris Johnson in withdrawing from the running minutes before the party was due to announce how many MPs had backed each candidate. In an apparent acknowledgement that she had not reached the necessary 100 MP threshold to progress, 2 minutes before the nomination process closed at 2 p.m, Penny Mordaunt tweeted that she had pulled out and that Sunak had her full support. 5 minutes later, Sir Graham Brady, the chair of the Conservative Backbench 1922 committee, formally announced the result. I can confirm that we have one valid nomination and Rishi Sunak is elected as leader of the Conservative Party, he said. Mr Sunak will formally take over as Prime Minister from Liz Truss most likely tomorrow, after meeting the King at Buckingham Palace, at which point Truss would have served 50 days in the job. The Scottish Greens co-leader Patrick Harvie MSP said Rishi Sunak's appointment will be music to the ears of his super-rich friends, but for millions of people in Scotland and beyond it will be devastating. The SNP Westminster leader Ian Blackford MP said the Tories were running scared of democracy and have no mandate to install a third leader or impose austerity cuts to cover the devastating cost of their mini-budget. The First Minister Nicola Sturgeon offered her congratulations in a series of tweets, saying, "I wish him well and, notwithstanding our political differences, will do my best to build a constructive working relationship with him in the interests of those we serve." She continued that he becomes the first British Asian to become Prime Minister is a genuinely significant moment. It certainly makes this a special Diwali. As for the politics, I'd suggest one immediate decision he should take and one he certainly should not. He should call an early general election, and he should not, must not, unleash another round of austerity. Our public services will not withstand that. For Scotland, of course, he becomes another PM we did not, and without doubt would not, vote for, even if given the chance, to escape the damage of Westminster, governments with no mandate here, and to take future into our own hands. Scotland needs independence. So, Ronnie, firstly, before we get into the events of today and the weekend, I think you will have been present in Westminster last week, I think, as events unfolded between Monday and Wednesday and then Thursday morning. I was wondering to hear from you about those astonishing events last week. At the beginning of last week, did it feel to you like Liz Truss would no longer be Prime Minister within only a few days?
It would be easy to say, "Oh yeah, I saw it coming." But honestly, this place it's been a guessing game almost since the day I got elected in 2015. When I came in here on a 5-year fixed term parliament thing in 2015, 2020, hopefully the job done, go home. That's the end of it. But with the election in 2017, it was completely unexpected. And then 2 years later, we do it all again. So you start with the habit of thinking, "Well, how long will this last?" So when Liz Truss comes in the manner in which she did, you're obviously thinking, well, the old lettuce thing, oh, sure, it lasted lettuce, oh, it lasted till Christmas. So there was always doubt, but I did not see it unravelling as quickly as it did unravel last week. It's one of those things, everyone says in politics, momentum is everything. And once it swung, and it was clear as going against her, it was then only a matter of time. But would you hang out to the weekend? What was going on behind the closed doors? What the 1922 committee actually holding her to, because we knew Graham Brady had had discussions with her because she disappeared out of the chamber, or had been in the chamber. Graham Brady disappeared out of the chamber. We all know people who know people. When I asked the question, some said she's at the 22 committee. You thought, is this the end of it? But you don't quite know it's over until it's over. And she hung on until obviously she was told, "You go or we get rid of you." And she's said number 10 said, "That's me gone." That's one of those things in politics. Once the whole momentum swings, it's very hard to stop it and reverse it. And I feel that's what's going to this entire Conservative Unionist government. But they're sort of doing this in stages by putting different blockers in place. A pick change here, oh, it's Russia, it's all going to be new, we're all going to do different things. But it's the same old all over again. Remember, Russia was in charge throughout the austerity crisis and was Boris Johnson's right-hand man for a period of time. So I'm afraid it's going to be more of the same.
Absolutely, Ronnie. And one other thing about the events of last week, in terms of the chaotic scenes which surrounded the Wednesday vote on fracking, which was and then was not a confidence vote in the Prime Minister, what did you see and hear? And depending on what you saw or heard, what do you think the Speaker's office should do as a result?
Well, I'll tell you, I was obviously there's no lobby. I was the yes lobby voting to stop it. There's a negative there. And they shut the doors, there's glass panels in it, so you can see out into the entrance to the other lobby, into the no lobby. And it was rammed. And people couldn't get through. And this is all the Conservatives getting pulled out on a 3 to go in there and vote. When they opened the doors for us to then step forward and one by one vote, there was like nowhere to go because there was no space. So there was a lot of people shoulder to shoulder saying, "Let me by, let me through." And I was trying to go into the central lobby. and I saw Mogg, this Mogg come in the opposite direction, a man on a mission. He pushed his way past me, and behind me I took 3 or 4 steps, and behind me I heard some very unparliamentary language being used, and obviously a disagreement which was coming from that side, which was Tory on Tory, people disagreeing in the strongest terms about what was happening. And yeah, it's a loud place within the chamber, but to hear that outside in the voting lobby is the first time I've heard it, the first time I've heard some of that language being used, and it would appear, from what I've since seen, it was a case of people trying to push their way into the lobby and other people trying to encourage people to push other people into the lobby to get them in there. But no later on any sort of democracy, obviously. Yeah.
Thanks, Ronnie. It's useful to hear directly from people who were present in Westminster at the time. But let's move on now and look a little bit more at today's coronation of the next Prime Minister. Patrick Harvey has said that in 2014 we were told that a no vote was the only way to secure our economic stability. Since then we have had 4 Prime Ministers, each of them even worse than the one before. Rishi Sunak will be the 5th. So do you think, will Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister be even worse than Truss, Johnson, May and Cameron before him?
Wow. It's almost inconceivable that they could get any worse, but every time we ask them, they step up to the plate and they do what we don't expect them to do. I mean, Rishi Sunak, him and his wife, personal wealth, £730 million. And this is a man that we expect to understand how the vast majority of people in the United Kingdom have to balance a budget and put money aside to pay for some of the bare necessities, to obviously heat their homes and put food on the table for them, for their kids, to put money away to pay their rent. And my own personal belief is to have that capacity to understand that, to truly understand that, to empathise with that, and to put together a policy which supports the vast majority of people in the United Kingdom. You have to have lived that life or have some experience of it. And Rishi's been so removed from it. Lives in a £6.6 million house. You know, he's not worried about his heating bill. And that's the thing. Whereas the majority of us are. I'm very fortunate, I'm a good living as an MP. And to be honest with you, I know, come on, I can pay it. I'll have to make cuts elsewhere because my bills could go astronomical, could go through the roof. So I'm aware of it. I don't think he is. I think money to Rishi Sunak is like oxygen is to me. It's there. I use it all the time. I take it for granted. If it's not there, I'll notice it. But while it's there, I'll just continue to accept the fact that it's there. And Rishi comes with that environment where it's just something you have and something you use to make more money. It's not the same concept of how you use money as most people do when they're going through their shopping, thinking, do I buy the supermarket brand or do I buy the more expensive looking brand? But when I check out, adding up what they've got in the basket, can I afford to pay for this? That's not something they've got any experience of whatsoever. And I'd like to see somebody in charge of the United Kingdom's finances who understand it's not just the big cogs or the big multi-billion pound projects. It's about the pound by pound existence that most people have to live in week by week and getting it right at that level. And what we've seen is, if you remember rightly, was another attempt at trickle down economics, which we've always said simply doesn't work. So if Rishi Sunak turns out and says, do you know what, I'm going to help the poorest in our society, I'm going to lift up the bottom level here, I'm going to bring them up, and then we're going to do that again and again and again, and that's how we're going to fix our society. I would say, hands up Rishi, you go for it. But you know what? It's Rishi Sunak, and we've already seen him in place as Chancellor, so I don't think we'll change his tune at all, to be honest with you. I think he would see this as an endorsement for his policies, and I worry about a number of things he said. I thought that it was quite good to actually have that leadership race, frustrating as always at the time, because they said a lot of revealing things in it, which he probably wouldn't have said if it was just a party campaign, but they were always trying to outdo each other. And Sunak's his criticism of the European Court for Human Rights, for example, putting it down to lefty lawyers, and he's playing to the room there, but to not have that cognizance to understand that we were watching too, and you have to be careful what you're saying. So we saw the real side of a few candidates in there, where they just, as if they were talking to their party members in front of them, which is what they were doing, they they revealed sides of themselves, because all the candidates, which I really thought was quite shocking, a real eye opener maybe to what we've actually got in charge here at Westminster. So I mean, as the Scottish Government tries to mitigate the austerity being heaped upon us from Westminster, I fear that Rishi will certainly not do enough to alleviate that situation. What his plans are long term, we'll have to see, but what we need on the 31st of October, which is going to be his real first test, can he get a bill through, can he get his financial statement through on the 31st of October? What I want to see there is something in that that says, I'm taking care of the poorest people in our society, and I understand that we have to prioritise their recovery before the recovery of the richest people in our society. And trying to get a Conservative and Unionist Party to vote that through on the 31st could be a real tough call. And that may well be the point where we say, this government is going nowhere and we do have to have a general, I think I would call for a general election now, but that might be the dawning on his own party. They've simply not, but the solidarity within their own party to get anything through the House of Commons, and effectively, that becomes a vote of confidence.
Well, that's a very good point, Ronnie, and I was about to ask you about that. It's reported that this afternoon, in Sunak's short behind-closed-doors remarks to Tory MPs, he told them that they had to come together and unite, that otherwise they faced an existential threat and that there would be no second chance. Now, he's already faced down clarion calls for a general election so far, something that, again, he ruled out this afternoon. But it's arguable that if he puts a foot wrong with any of the MPs who backed any of his rivals for the role of Prime Minister, the calls will start up again and will be louder. So do you think, Ronnie, from what you can see happening in Westminster, how long do you think it will be before those who John Major famously called the bastards start working against Rishi Sunak?
Well, they've already started. That's the way their party works. But importantly, if he's putting out his clarion call, a rally call to his troops, to get his elected members to get behind him or to get around something, he has to produce that something. Actually, this is something we all believe in and we can all push for. And to me, it has to be this financial statement on the 31st of October. That's the test. That's the test for him. If he gets that wrong, in the same way as Kwasi Kwarteng got his financial statement wrong, was that many days ago, 4 weeks ago, whatever it was now. If he makes the same mistakes in there, then the show's over.
Thanks, Ronnie. Let's move to the other side of the House of Commons now and look at British politics in another perspective, because in an LBC phone-in today, the Labour leader said it's a straight no from me on the UK rejoining the EU under Labour, and also said that we do think that we should make Brexit work, despite the growing list of warnings over the devastating impact Brexit is having on the economy, businesses and people's lives. Keir Starmer also said he would continue with Tory plans for stiff sentences for climate protesters who block roads, despite reiterating Labour's pledge for no new oil and gas licences, as two Just Stop Oil activists caked a waxwork of King Charles. In the same LBC interview, Starmer confirmed that a Labour government would back proposals to introduce stiff sentences for people who protest by blocking roads. Mr Starmer has also said that there is not a great deal between Labour and the Tories on immigration policy, with two exceptions. He wants the best possible students to come here to the UK, and he won't continue with the Rwanda plan. The SNP's Europe spokesperson, Dr Philippa Whitford MP, said Keir Starmer's Brexit sellout makes it clearer than ever that independence is the only route back into the EU for Scotland. It's staggering that rather than opposing this economically devastating policy, Keir Starmer is enthusiastically embracing the Tories' extreme Brexit and all the damage that comes with it. We know that Brexit has ripped us out of a market 7 times bigger than the UK, hammered businesses and stripped away opportunities. Yet Starmer's Labour, it seems, is intent on reading from the Tory script. He won't even consider single market membership, just like the Tories. She continued, whether it is on Brexit or immigration, Keir Starmer is grasping every opportunity to reassure people that Labour, under him, are just like the Tories. So, Ronnie, it's arguable that Brexit has destroyed the careers of 4 Prime Ministers, Cameron, May, Johnson and Truss. Sunak is likely to find he cannot deliver a sensible policy on the EU, given the relentless ideological obsession of much of the Tory party with using the EU as its focus of hate. Why does Starmer want to borrow the Tory party's clothes? And why does he think that he can do any better than Cameron, May, Johnson, or Truss?
You know, it's really interesting because what Keir Starmer has done is lined himself up with the same tools to fight the same problems, and he seems to think he can do it better than anybody else. Rather than turning this around and saying, let's address this problem in a completely different fashion, he's going to do the same thing and blunder down the Brexit road. And with no cognizance to the fact that 4% was ripped off the GDP, £100 billion. You know, the issues we're hearing day in, day out. I think it's a horrible thing to say now, but COVID almost gave the Brexiteers a get out. All the things that have been damaging our economy, we almost have accepted them because we had COVID to deal with during that time as well. I think if it hadn't been for COVID, the real effect of Brexit would be more obvious to people, and that more people would be kicking back against it, and maybe even the Labour Party. Because all that's going to happen here is if we have a general election, which we should, and Labour storm it in England, which the polls say they will, they wouldn't do it in Scotland, they'll do it in England, enough to give them a solid majority here at Westminster. All we're going to do is have the same mindset, trying to address the same problems and coming up with the same solutions, and nothing will move forward at all. We need an opposition that says, even we'll give you a referendum to back into Brexit, give a second crack at it. No, or we will take you back into EU, we'll negotiate our way back into EU, because who knows if the EU wants us back in this stage in the game. But right now, for him to say we'll carry on regardless, doing what the Tories have been doing, and believe that for some reason he and his team will be better in negotiating trade deals and international treaties, which so far have been floundered time and time again under the Conservative Unionist government, to me is simply a man desperate for power and prepared to say anything he thinks will appease the electorate to vote for him. Because there was a big Brexit vote in England, so he's appealing to them. They'll have done their polling and then decide what their policies are going to be. I'm a believer in politicians that say, this is what I believe in. You know, this is what I will stand for. If you don't want to vote for me, don't vote for me. I'm not going to sell my soul to the devil just to get a position in power and just to be the next person to fill the hot seat at number 10 Downing Street. I mean, way back before we actually voted for Brexit, I remember I was talking to a Canadian politician who was Indian, first generation Indian, and she was saying to me, I don't understand why the UK think they can renegotiate these treaties with India. We learned from the first time, she said to me, her words, we learned from the first time. And I've heard that from a number of countries since then. You know, we've delegations from Africa and Middle Eastern countries and Far Eastern countries through here all the time. And whatever the subject matter is, eventually we're going to talking about trade deals. You know? And they're all, every single one of them that I've spoken to said the same thing. We're holding cards here. We don't need the UK. We need the EU 27. So they've got bargaining power with us. We don't need the UK. Don't come to us telling us what the conditions of the trade deal are going to be, or what our international treaties are going to look like. So, until you've learned to treat us as equals. And that's something this place is very, very bad at doing. We're used to the empire mentality that says, here we are, we're Britannia, you will want to deal with us, and this is what we'll do. And historically, it's worked for them because of positions of power 100 years ago or whatever. But now, it's a completely different situation, and I really don't think that the Labour Party have got their heads around that. If they think they're going to come to the table with the same mindset and the same set of tools and try and do the same things, that they think they'll just do it better. I think they've completely underestimated the mindset of those we're trying to strike deals with, and we need those trade deals if we're going to bring the economy back up to what it should be.
Thanks, Ronnie. That's a great perspective. Let's continue on the Brexit theme now, though, because the billionaire businessman Guy Hands has accused the Conservatives of putting the UK on a path to be the sick man of Europe, as he issued a series of stark predictions about what could lie ahead for the post-Brexit economy, including higher taxes and interest rates and fewer social services. The founder and chair of the private equity firm Terra Firma, a long-time Tory supporter, called for the government to renegotiate Brexit, stating that otherwise the British economy was, frankly, doomed. The Conservative Party needed to move on from fighting its own internal wars and actually focus on what needs to be done in the economy, Hand said on Radio 4's Today programme this morning. So, Ronnie, a remarkable intervention on the Today programme. For the first time, there was an all-out attack on Brexit. Guy Hans is the boss of the big investment firm Terra Firma. He's a major Tory donor and is close to the former Tory leader, William Hague, who turned the Conservatives into an anti-EU party during his leadership between 1997 and 2001. But he has said there is no positive economic horizon for the UK and Brexit should be renegotiated. So despite the well-documented damage the isolation of Brexit has caused, and opinion polls showing that there's now a 51 to 35 majority to rejoin Europe, that's from Omnisis on the 14th of October, economic actors like the CBI, trade bodies, chambers of commerce, farmers, and the city refused to criticise Britain's rupture with Europe. So what do you think's changed and what has prompted Guy Hans to speak the truth?
His perception has obviously changed, and although he is the one who's stood up and spoken out about it, I can't for 1 minute believe he's the only one that's seeing this. I think there are some people with such vast wealth that they believe they can weather this storm and still be vastly wealthy. Maybe it's simply a case of, the fear of not being a billionaire, only having 900 million or 800 million or something. And at that point, they start, hold on, my wealth is trickling away here. The opportunities which were open to me in the past to top up my vast wealth are no longer as obvious, no longer as accessible, or simply harder for me to do. And they're becoming to understand what we've all been saying, or most of us have been saying from day one, is that the best trade agreement we could have, the best trading partners we could have, were the EU in the first place. The high sunny uplands, I think was a Jason Rees-Mogg phrase, simply don't exist. And I think to most people, that was obvious. My surprise is not what they're saying now. My surprise is they fell for the Brexit lies in the first place. How they thought they could maintain their wealth, maintain their status by leaving the EU, I don't understand. That I'm not a billionaire businessman, so they must have had some sort of plan, but maybe that plan was trade deals with America, trade deals with Australia, trade deals with India, and we suddenly realise that those are not forthcoming. We don't have Trump in the White House, thank goodness, anymore. So maybe those trade deals have died. I spoke to a businessman I know who told me that the Indian trade deal was not going to get signed off before Christmas. This was about a month or so ago. He actually thought that Johnson had a chance. I don't trust it, no chance whatsoever. She's now gone, so maybe that will aid that one along. If it helps trade deals and it helps people out, then not long. Fair enough. Let's do it. I still feel that if the guys like that are now saying we've got to look back at Brexit and something, a light bulb or something's going on in their head. I say I'm not a millionaire businessman. I don't know how they made all the money in the first place. But however they made it, it's obviously becoming tougher. And I don't know what your bank balance is like. I've got a level, if it drops below, I think, oh dear, what are we going to do with this? Maybe his limit's £1 billion, I don't know.
Might well be. It's an interesting point you make about the Indian trade deal. Let's see whether Mr. Sunak's father-in-law, the billionaire Indian businessman, Mr. Murthy, is able to intervene on behalf of the UK government and maybe get things moving there. But your points are very well made. Thanks, Ronnie. But let's move on and look at the economy now, because footfall at retail outlets in the UK fell by 2.3% last week as economic turmoil continues to squeeze household budgets. Research by the retail analysts Springboard found high streets, retail parks and shopping centres had fewer visits than in the week before. High streets were worst hit with a 3.3% decline, while retail parks and shopping centres fell by 1.5% and 0.7% respectively. Overall, footfall was up 5.9% compared with the same time in 2021, when the country was just emerging from the pandemic, but is down more than 11% on 2019. The data comes amid steep jumps in mortgages and other costs after the budget in September, with inflation at a 30-year high and increasing concern about the economic outlook. The biggest decline in footfall was in the West Midlands, with overall footfall down 3.7% compared with the week before, while the East Midlands fell by 3.2%. In central London, footfall declined by 3.3%, in Northern England and Yorkshire by 2.5%, and the only area to record an increase was Scotland, up by 1.1%. The research adds to a range of data showing the impact of the rising cost of living on households in the UK. The UK's biggest food bank network, Trussell Trust, has said it expects to distribute 1.3 million emergency food parcels over the next 6 months. Now, in the second quarter of this year, more than 2.3 million households were in arrears on their electricity, while more than 1.8 million were behind on their gas. Both totals were up by almost two-thirds since the end of 2020. So, Ronnie, should we be surprised that high street retail is slowing down so sharply? And what do you think will be the implications for jobs? Statista estimated that almost 350,000 people in Scotland worked in retail in 2021.
Yeah, I mean, the retail industry, the retail sector has been under enormous pressure for quite some time now. Initially, we saw the huge out-of-town hypermarket type things being set up, and they damaged our high streets, and then a few years later, the internet comes along, and people are doing internet shopping, and that damaged the high street. And now we're getting down to the state where it's on top of that. It's simply the fact that people don't have the money to spend in the first place. You made an interesting point about food banks. I visited my food bank in Inverclyde a couple of weeks ago now, and they've got a large store where they keep all the goods before they get packaged up and sent out. And I go there on a fairly regular basis, and when I walked in, I couldn't believe how empty it was. And that's simply because people, it sounds incredible, people can't afford to give to the food bank now. You know, people would normally put an extra couple of things in their shopping basket, hand them into the food bank, or put it into sort of the collection bins that supermarkets have. Simply aren't doing that in the same numbers as they were previously. And also, people would hand in money and say, you'll buy of the extra goods as you need, because you have a better idea of what's going on than I do. They're not handing in that same amount of money. And the food banks are really struggling, and one of the I was talking to put anything together. And every year they run a special one at Christmas time to make sure every kid has got a Christmas, whether it's a toy or what have you. And this year they're talking about not doing it because they simply don't have the funds to do it. And that's really that. You don't get much more grassroots and nitty gritty than that. So if people are not giving to their food banks, then it's very easy to see that they're not looking after themselves either. They won't be spending the same money in the supermarkets, they won't be spending the same money on any form of retail. It basically comes down to austerity. This latest tranche is basically down to austerity and the fact that people simply can't afford it. I don't think there's so much a case of choosing am I internet shopping or am I high street shopping. They're just not shopping.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ronnie. And thank you for that information and update with regard to the food bank that you visit regularly in Inverclyde. But let's move on now and look at another implication of Brexit, because leading lawyers have sounded the alarm over Jacob Rees-Mogg's proposals for a post-Brexit legislation that could result in 2,400 laws disappearing overnight, including a ban on animal testing for cosmetics, workers' rights and environmental protections. Lawyers, including one former UK government legal official who designed the concept of EU retained law for Theresa May, have branded the move as anti-democratic and completely barking. Swathes of laws including equal pay for men and women, pension rights for same-sex married couples, food standards and aviation safety rules could accidentally disappear or be redrafted poorly, they warn. The retained EU law revocation and reform bill will get its second reading tomorrow. It was designed in such a way that 47 years of laws devised during EU membership will be switched off on the 31st of December 2023 under a so-called sunset clause. A lot of laws are going to be changed without any scrutiny at all by a dying government that few people respect, said George Peretz KC, a specialist in European law. And the Unison General Secretary, Christine McInerney, said this is a countdown to disaster for all working people. It would mean turning the clock back to Dickensian times when workers had no rights. The bill also gives ministers the powers to rewrite or update the rules with no requirement to consult and at most only a 2 hour debate in Parliament to say yes or no. But despite promises from Rees-Mogg that Brexit could mean higher standards than the EU's, this bill does not confer power to improve standards and protections, only to reduce them. So, Ronnie, the retained EU law revocation and reform bill is due to get its second reading on tomorrow. And it's been designed in such a way that 47 years of laws devised during EU membership will be switched off automatically on the 31st of December next year. But given the chaos that we've been discussing in Westminster and the likelihood that Rishi Sunak will appoint a new cabinet, what do you think the chances are that this bill will get a second reading this week, given that there's now a new Prime Minister?
Well, they've not been shy in the past of changing the order of business at very short notice. There's no indication at this moment in time that they're going to do that. The business papers won't be out until first thing tomorrow morning, but it can be changed. I would be surprised if they dropped it, because I still think they've got enough support to get that through. So I think it'll probably go through tomorrow night. Unfortunately, there'll be enough 3 whip to get it through. But the whole thing that you read out there to me is the strongest three different things there. If you're not in a trade union, join one. Rees-Mogg is self-serving, conceited, entitled, and not fit to govern. And what you're seeing is an all-out attack on your democracy, and quite unashamedly so. And I don't want to put into hyperbole here, but we've seen this before in history, when people do the most atrocious things, but they didn't actually break any laws because they changed the laws to allow them to do those atrocious things. And we're looking at that, we're staring down that barrel right now at Westminster, that all these laws which protect people, which give them the right to protest, which give them the right to have fair tribunals, which give them the right to work, are all going to get ripped away. And they're going to do it legally by marching people through the House of Commons tomorrow to vote for it. So if you're not angry about this, I would suggest that you should be. I go back to my first point: if you're not a member of a trade union, join one.
Very succinctly and very powerfully put, Ronnie. Thank you. Now then, we'll move on and look at Scotland a little bit more now, because becoming an independent country would give Scotland the powers and levers to reform the energy market and help to deliver a stronger, more resilient supply with lower costs, our Energy Secretary Michael Matheson has said. The Energy Secretary will travel to Brussels this week to promote Scottish hydrogen production during European Hydrogen Week and for meetings on North Sea hydrogen infrastructure with key industry figures and ministers from Belgium and the Netherlands. The trip follows the publication of the latest paper in the Building a New Scotland series last week, which set out plans to enhance Scotland's renewable energy production, such as hydrogen, onshore and offshore wind, tidal and wave energy, and puts renewables at the centre of a new Scottish economy. It also proposes new market frameworks to develop and deploy renewable hydrogen and carbon capture storage proposals that cannot currently be delivered as energy is reserved to Westminster. Mr Matheson said, "Hydrogen may be Scotland's greatest industrial opportunity since oil and gas. It will play a key role in delivering net zero in industrial and heavy transport use and in the domestic economy, potentially heating our homes and buildings, and there is significant export potential." The recently published Economy Prospectus paper for an Independent Scotland sets out how we would put renewable energies such as hydrogen at the centre of the economy. Scotland is an energy-rich country. Becoming independent would give us the powers and levers to reform the energy market and ensure a stronger, more resilient supply with lower costs. He continued, "European Hydrogen Week is an excellent opportunity to showcase everything that Scotland has to offer and to work closely with our European friends and partners on the key issues we must collectively address to realise the full potential of hydrogen as part of the green energy transition." So, Ronnie, in terms of what the Energy Secretary Michael Matheson is telling us, is the approach that he seems to be discussing here, is it something that we should see more of from the Scottish Government? Bypass the clown show in Westminster and deal with others who want to actually deliver on the green agenda, and a green agenda which works for everyone?
I think as much as we possibly can, in all sectors, but renewable energy is a perfect example for us. some people have heard me banging on about this for years. About 6 years ago now, I wrote a paper called The Island of Inverclyde. And I looked at Inverclyde and said, what we should be doing here is becoming self-sufficient in renewable energies and turn Inverclyde into a centre of excellence where people can develop different sorts of clean, green, and now blue energy. And then you find the mix which is right for your geographical location, whether it's offshore wind, onshore wind, tidal or solar, or putting some biomass in there for small projects, and then develop it and build it. And I remember the day when solar energy was not viable north of Manchester, but that didn't stop us developing it and refining it and making it better. And we've got to do the same thing with all these clean, green, and blue renewable energy sources because, frankly, as a planet, we don't have a choice. We cannot keep on using oil and gas. We cannot keep ripping up our forests. We cannot keep on damaging our little precious blue planet spinning through space in the way we've been doing for hundreds of years. We have to stop and do something else, or we're simply not going to exist anymore. So can Scotland do that on its own? We should be encouraging companies to come to Scotland, and we should be encouraging our own, very importantly, encouraging our own incubation companies to grow the technology through our university and our research sector, and looking for that next thing. What's going to make solar more effective, but offshore, onshore, tidal, and we're looking at Inverclyde. We're looking at a way of heating our municipal buildings and serving houses from heat extracted from the River Clyde. I won't give the company a plug because that went for another companies, but we can do this. We have this technology. So why should we be using oil and gas to do it? But we've sat back, and I think personally, it's an easy thing to say. We should have been doing this a decade ago. But I've probably said this programme before. A good friend of mine, John McNally, is always saying to me, when's the best time to plant a tree? And the answer was 10 years ago. It always is. And that's the deal. So if we didn't do it 10 years ago, we've got to do it now. Like Michael Bath is absolutely right. We've got to forget what these clouds are doing here. I mean, Cameron started this because I'm maybe watch my language here, but it was disparaging of green energy. Yeah? And that carried on in the trust at Johnson. The last one was Trust. Sorry, I've lost track of my two MPs here. May, Johnson, Trust, and now I have to wait and see what Sunak's got to say about it. But this is a classic example. I mean, we look at Scotland and you look at other countries and think, well, have they got the same resources for renewable energy? And by and large, they don't have the mix that Scotland have got. I noticed that Greece a couple of weeks ago said they're 100% solar electricity because Greece has got that sunshine. So said, what have we got? Hey, let's use that. Well, we've got a certain amount of wind and rain and water in Scotland, which should be to our benefit. I'm talking about Inverclyde again, built on a slope. We've got water reservoirs at the back of our town, which were there 150 years ago, which we used hydropower for, and we've allowed that to decline. We've got the River Clyde in front of us. We've got as much rain as we could possibly require and a little bit extra, and we've got gravity driving it down these hills. And we should be using those things to say that's what we've got on our doorstep. Therefore, that's the cheapest stuff for us to use. So you don't then have to transport it through a grid for miles and miles and also get ourselves away from the ridiculous connectivity charges at Westminster as opposed to Scotland as well. So I think Mike was absolutely right in what he's saying. I'm frustrated about this because I think we should do it quicker and bigger, but I understand it's not quite as simple as that. But we've got to start it or we'll never get there. Because we have to start that journey.
Absolutely, Ronnie. Thank you. As you say, we need to start that journey. Let's move across the Atlantic now, because jury selection is due to start in the tax fraud trial of former US President Donald Trump's real estate company today, with prosecutors in Manhattan accusing the business of defrauding tax authorities by awarding off-the-books benefits to company executives. The criminal trial in a New York state court is one of a mounting number of legal woes for Trump as he considers another run for the presidency in 2024. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office charged the Trump Organization and Alan Weisselberg, its then chief financial officer, in July 2021. Weisselberg pleaded guilty in August to 15 charges, which included grand larceny and tax fraud, and admitted concealing $1.76 million in income in an agreement with prosecutors that requires him to testify at this trial. The Trump Organization, which operates hotels, golf courses, and other real estate around the world, could face fines of up to $1.6 million in fines for the 3 tax fraud counts and 6 other counts it faces. Lawyers for the Trump Organization have called the case a selective prosecution, based on animosity by the prosecution towards Trump for his politics, an argument already rejected by the judge overseeing the trial. Weisselberg's plea agreement stated that he evaded paying taxes on unreported income from the Trump Organization in the form of benefits, including rent payments for a Manhattan apartment, multiple Mercedes-Benz cars, private school tuition for his grandchildren, and cash and furnishings for his apartment and home in Florida. The plea agreement calls for Weisselberg to serve 5 months in jail. So, Ronnie, when I was preparing this story, I was reminded that in December 1990, John Gotti was arrested at the Ravenite Social Club, his headquarters in New York City's Little Italy. The ensuing trial, which started in January 92, created a media frenzy. Salvatore Sammy the Bull Graviano, one of Gotti's top soldiers, made a deal with the government and testified in court against his boss. Graviano admitted to committing 19 murders, 10 of them sanctioned by Gotti. So do you think by bringing Weisselberg to court, having already secured his guilty plea, are New York prosecutors shadowing the approach that they traditionally take in bringing down organised crime bosses? And don't worry about the division bell in the background.
Apologise for the division bell ringing here. I think that's close of play. Am I worried about it? I'm worried about getting a jury in place which doesn't come with any preconceptions. Yeah, and I suppose that's always a concern with any jury. But as you were talking about that case, I was thinking about the movie 12 Angry Men. If I ever watched that as a kid, fantastic film, great actors, Henry Fonda, Lee J. Cobb, Jack Klugman, and thinking that was really interesting and fun and interesting. That's why that'd be a real great thing to take part in. But I'm wondering, who can you bring to this jury who doesn't have a preconceived idea of what Donald Trump is and what he's about? So it's going to be a real tough call, even with somebody turning around and saying, I was the inside, I've seen it, because he's already been found guilty and is obviously now fighting to save his own skin and keep himself out of prison, which is really unfortunate they couldn't find somebody who just appeared to stand up before the court and tell the truth in the first place. So I think it's a very, very difficult one. I mean, we've all got our views of what Donald Trump is and his organisations, but in a court of law, you have to go in there and discard all that stuff and just listen to what's put there in front of you. And when that's coming from somebody, as you say, who's struck a deal, then all the comparisons you made with an excellent comparison, and I'm sure the people in that courtroom thinking exactly the same thing.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ronnie. We can maybe turn off the sound for you so the division bell's not so loud, and we'll move on to our next and final story this evening, because National Museums of Scotland has acquired an exceptionally rare gold sword pommel, created around 700 AD. Discovered in Stirlingshire, this spectacular object is one of the first of its kind ever found in Scotland, and has been allocated to the museum by the King's and Lord Treasurer's Remembrancer following the recommendation of the Scottish Archaeological Finds Allocation Panel. The pommel was discovered by a metal detectorist and declared to the Treasure Trove Unit in accordance with Scots law. It was subsequently allocated to the National Museums of Scotland by the Scottish Archaeological Finds Allocation Panel. The pommel is a decorative fitting that would have capped the top of a sword hilt made over 1,000 years ago. Crafted in solid gold, the object is encrusted with garnets and intricate goldwork. The rich and technically accomplished decoration is highly symbolic, featuring religious motifs and fantastical creatures. The discovery was made near Blair Drummond in Scotland, adding significantly to its archaeological value, affirming important cultural, political and artistic interactions between Scotland and the north of England. Its decoration masterfully combines elements from both Anglo-Saxon England and the kingdoms of early medieval Scotland. The vibrant, insular art style, made famous by the illuminated manuscripts such as the Lindisfarne Gospels, is a unique contribution to medieval European art, and the sterling pommel is an outstanding expression of this creative fusion in gold. So, Ronnie, when I was reading this story, it struck me that the description of the decorations were very strikingly similar to those that you see on the Celtic cross at Kildalton on Islay, which is also believed to date from around 700 AD. So, without thinking about those specific items, but thinking more generally, how important is it that everyone in Scotland has a better appreciation of our ancient cultural history and our shared inheritance of that history and that culture?
I think it's interesting that story that because I was talking to somebody recently, and when I was at school, I didn't have a real grasp of history. It was obviously not very pertinent to my life at that time as a 14, 15-year-old growing up in Europe. I was much more interested in the future than I was in the past. I was much more into the Apollo missions and space and where it was going to take us to. But as I've got older, my appreciation of history has grown and grown. And I think when you dig up something, I mean, physically dig up something like that, and you can see it, and you can handle it, and look at it, and understand the craftsmanship required to make that all those years ago, you begin to understand the culture around it and the civilization which actually made it, and the sort of lives they must have lived. You know, maybe I'm too entrenched in the Monty Python movies. I've seen sort of people living in mud and rich kings riding by them. But we had those civilizations and with those communities, a lot of which the skill set have been lost over time for different reasons of manufacturing. But to have a physical thing like that you can look at and think, people made that. Some guy somewhere, that was his skill. This was craft. This is what he did for a living, and he made something like that, and it would have been owned and cherished, and maybe lost if it wasn't a battle or whatever. The way the owner was killed defending himself or trying to kill other people, we don't know. But I think when you go back and when you develop that stuff, interest in history, and realise it was when people were creating that history, they were just living their day-to-day lives, and that as we're doing now. So to go back to that and think about the people, the lives they lived, the food they ate, the clothes they made, where the raw materials came from. They were living lives not too dissimilar to ours, but obviously without all the technology around them. And it makes it a very human thing. History starts to live, it starts to come off the page. That's something you can feel, you can breathe it, you can hear it around you. And I think these artifacts are very important in sort of reminding me of that. I was very recently fortunate enough to be in Granada at the Alhambra to see that mosque, to see what the Moors had happened to the Moors and the Christians who came along after it, and to see that happening in that part of Granada really brought the whole thing alive as to how history sort of overlaps and one culture then takes over and homes in another one, and another one comes along, and it's almost like the strata, the layers of history are there if you're just prepared to dig through them and have a look at them. So I find that in Scotland, it to me is very important to show that it's not just what we've got now, not what we want to create over the next 20, 30 years. It is very important to realise what we came from, because what we came from is indicative of how we got to where we are now.
Thanks, Ronnie. Some good points, very well made there. Thank you. But I'm afraid to say that is all that we have time for this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. Please help us to continue to make these programmes and to continue to develop the station. To everyone who has already donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 per month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us to employ staff to make more programmes. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, either behind the scenes or in front of the cameras, or any other way that helps our work, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. Meantime, we will be here again at 7 o'clock tomorrow evening with the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please tune in and join us again then. But that's the way it is at very nearly Scotland at 8. I'd like to thank everyone who has been watching, and I'd like to give very special thanks to our very special guest, Ronnie Cowan MP. Thanks, Ronnie. On this day in 1854, Scottish soldiers were fighting in the Battle of Balaclava in Crimea. Watched by the Times' famous war correspondent William H. Russell, the successful defence put up by the 93rd Highland Division was hailed as a triumph and became known as the Thin Red Line due to the colour of the Scottish troops' jackets. More generally, armed conflict between powerful nations is still playing out in Ukraine almost 170 years later. We need to listen to and learn the lessons of history. Please have a very peaceful evening. Bye-bye.